He was 12 years old. A shepherd. He could not read or write. In 1212, Stephen of Cloyes claimed Jesus appeared to him and commanded him to lead a crusade of children to Jerusalem. He stood on a cart and told crowds that sinful knights had failed God. Only children with pure souls could win Jerusalem. The sea would part for them. The crowd believed every word. People wept at his feet. They touched his hands like he was a saint. Within days, hundreds had gathered. Within weeks, thousands had left their homes to follow him. They called themselves the Crusaders of the Pure in heart. Most were between 10 and 14. They carried wooden crosses, sang hymns, and marched south toward the sea with nothing but faith. The weak began to fall almost immediately. The youngest could not keep pace. There were no doctors, no medicine, no food supplies. Children died on the road before reaching the coast. The others buried them in shallow graves and kept walking. No markers. No names. Just dirt over small bodies on the side of a road no one would ever visit again. Still the column grew. Children abandoned their villages and ran to join the march. From a distance the column looked like a river of crosses slowly moving south toward the sea. They were barefoot on roads built for armies. Their feet bled. Their clothes tore. But they believed God was watching every step, and Jerusalem was waiting at the end of the road. While Stephen marched through France, a second crusade was forming in Germany. Nicholas of Cologne was 10 years old. He also claimed a divine vision. He also gathered thousands of followers. Nicholas led his followers south along the Rhine toward Italy. They sang as they walked. They believed the mountains ahead were no obstacle for God's chosen children. They were wrong. The Alps killed them. The passes were steep and treacherous. Snow lay on the ground even in summer at high altitude. The children had no warm clothes, no boots, no guides. Hundreds died of cold, starvation, and exhaustion. Those who fell were left where they lay. The survivors could not stop. Staying still meant death. They stepped over the dead and kept moving. Nicholas reached Genoa with a fraction of his followers. He told the bishop God would part the sea. The bishop took him to the harbor. Nothing happened. The children stood at the water's edge for hours and waited for the miracle. It never came. Nicholas disappeared from history shortly after. No one ever found out what became of him. The children were stranded in a foreign country with no money, no food, and no way home. Most became beggars. The citizens of Genoa grew tired of them quickly. Some died of disease and hunger in Italian streets. A handful eventually made it back to Germany, broken and aged beyond their years. The German crusade ended without a single child reaching the sea. Stephen's crusade reached Paris. Thousands more children joined. King Philip II refused to receive him. His advisors called it dangerous madness. The king agreed. The children kept marching anyway. Not everyone watching was moved by faith. Slave traders have been following the column for weeks, watching the children with cold professional eyes, calculating the opportunity walking past them. Two merchants named Hugh Farius and William Porcus offered Stephen 7 ships and free passage to the Holy Land. They called it an act of devotion to God. Stephen believed them completely. 7 ships waited at Marseilles. The children boarded eagerly. This was the moment they had marched toward for weeks. The sailors watched them climb the gangplanks in silence. The ship sailed south on a calm summer morning. The children waved from the decks and pointed toward where they believed Jerusalem waited. They had already been sold before leaving the harbor. 2 ships sank in a violent storm near Sardinia. Every child aboard drowned. The sea had not parted for them. It had swallowed them without mercy. The 5 remaining ships did not sail to Jerusalem. They sailed to North Africa. When the children saw the coastline, they knew something was wrong. By then it was too late. Stephen did not board any of the ships. He vanished before they sailed. The boy who had launched 30,000 children on a march across France disappeared without a trace. Alexandria in 1212 was one of the greatest cities in the world. Its slave markets were among the largest in the Mediterranean. When 5 ships arrived carrying European children, the traders were ready. The children were taken off the ships in chains. They did not speak Arabic. They did not know where they were. They had no way to send word home. They were inspected like livestock. Buyers checked their teeth and muscles. The youngest were the most valuable. They could be shaped into whatever their new owners needed them to become. Girls were sold into domestic service. They cooked and cleaned in foreign households. They raised their owners' children while their own families lit candles and prayed for them back in France. Boys were purchased by military commanders and entered the Mamluk system. They were given Arabic names, taught the Quran, trained in swordsmanship, and transformed into soldiers of a foreign empire. Some children who had marched for Jerusalem ended up fighting against it. As Mamluk soldiers, they faced Christian Crusader armies in battle. They fought against their own people. They never came home. A small number of priests traveled to North Africa with whatever funds they could gather and attempted to ransom the captured children. The prices were high. They saved very few. The few who were ransomed returned to Europe with stories of the slave markets. The stories spread across the continent. No one was ever punished. The traders kept every coin. Pope Innocent III heard the news. He had not authorized the crusade. He called it a tragedy. He issued no punishment, opened no investigation, and did absolutely nothing else. Across France and Germany, parents searched for their children. They traveled to Marseilles and Genoa. They asked sailors and merchants. Most received no answers. Most found nothing. Some fathers searched for years. They stood at harbors staring at empty seas, knowing their children were gone, knowing they would never find them. There was no closure. Only silence. Some villages lost nearly all their young. The fields went untended. The houses stood empty. An entire generation was gone. Those villages never fully recovered from what had happened to them. Mothers lit candles in churches for decades. They prayed for children who would never return. Most died without ever knowing what had happened to their sons and daughters. Children who died on the march were buried in unmarked graves. No names. No villages recorded. They became anonymous bones in foreign soil. Their families had no graves to visit. Chroniclers wrote with horror. They called it madness and folly. They could not explain how it had been allowed to happen. They wrote it down so it would not be forgotten. A handful of survivors made it back to Europe. Some refused to speak of it. Others could not stop. They were the last living witnesses to one of the greatest disasters ever inflicted on the innocent. To understand why 30,000 children followed a shepherd boy out of their villages, you must understand their world. Life was short, poor, and brutal. Heaven was not a comfort. It was the only hope. Crusades had been preached for over a century. Priests told villagers that those who died fighting for Jerusalem went directly to paradise. The message was simple, emotional, and endlessly repeated. Children absorbed it completely. These children had no books, no maps, no competing sources of information. They knew only what priests told them. And priests told them God needed Jerusalem back, and pure children could deliver it. Parents who released their children were not cruel. Many believed a divine calling could not be refused. Some thought they were sending them to paradise. All believed something that was not true. The children were genuinely joyful. They sang and laughed as they marched. They had been given a mission by God Himself. They had no fear. They had no doubt. That was the problem. The criminals following them were counting on exactly that faith. A child who believes God is protecting them does not look for danger. Faith was their greatest strength and their most fatal weakness. They trusted everyone who spoke in the name of God. They had been raised to. No one had taught them that a man could speak like a believer and act like a predator. They walked into the ships willingly. They thanked the men who were selling them. They prayed for fair winds. They sang as the hatches closed above them. They were still singing. The historical record of the Children's Crusade is incomplete. Sources were written years after the events and disagree on details. Some historians argue the scale was exaggerated. Others defend it. The debate continues. But evidence exists across multiple countries. Pope Innocent III letters mention it. German and French church records note mass disappearances of young people. Slave market records in Alexandria confirm European children arrived in 1212. Were there truly 30,000? Possibly fewer. But even a fraction of that number of children dead or enslaved represents a catastrophe without equal in medieval history. Over the centuries the story became legend. Artists and poets returned to it again and again. It was the perfect symbol of innocent faith destroyed by adult cruelty and greed. In 2002, a memorial was erected in Germany. A simple bronze sculpture of children walking together. Their faces are hopeful. They do not know what is waiting for them. That hope is the most heartbreaking part. They were not afraid. They were certain. But certainty is not the same as safety. It never was. It never will be. There are a few plaques in a few churches. No grand monument. No national cemetery. The children left almost nothing behind. Only the story, and the warning buried inside it. The sea is calm now. The slave markets are gone. But the story survives because it must. It is a warning dressed as history. And warnings must never be forgotten. A small number of children survived the slave markets and eventually found their way back to Europe. They returned to towns that had moved on without them, to families that barely recognized them. They had left as singing believers. They returned as something harder to name. Not quite the people they would have been. Not entirely the people their captors had tried to make them. They carried the evidence of what had been done to them in their bodies and their silences. Some told their stories once and never again. Some could not stop telling them. A few chroniclers recorded the survivors' testimonies in full. Those documents survive in European archives. They are rarely read today. The language is old. The stories are buried. They wait. The survivors lived out their lives among people who could not fully understand what they had seen. They watched other children grow up safe. They wondered sometimes why those children and not them. Some kept the wooden crosses they had carried on the march. They wore them for the rest of their lives. The cross was the only thing they had brought back. Everything else was gone. The female survivors said even less. What had been done to them was not something medieval Europe had words or sympathy for. They kept their silence and carried it alone until they died. When the survivors died, most were buried without record of what they had experienced. Their stories died with them. Only the written testimonies remain. Only the graves without names. Thousands never returned. They lived out their entire lives in North Africa and the Middle East. They had new names, new languages, new religions. The people they had been were methodically erased. Some fully became the people they were forced to become. They prayed 5 times a day, fought with loyalty, and had no memory of singing hymns in a French village as children. Some rose to positions of military authority. The Mamluks rewarded skill and loyalty regardless of origin. A few became commanders. They had power. They had purpose. They had nothing else. The girls who survived grew into women in foreign households. Some were eventually freed when they grew old. Most were not. They cooked and cleaned and served until their bodies could no longer work. Did any of them remember? Did any of them, in quiet moments at night, recall a village in France, a wooden cross, a boy standing on a cart promising that the sea would part? Some kept their crosses hidden. Small pieces of worn wood tucked into clothing or buried in the walls of rooms they occupied. Tiny private anchors to a life that had been stolen from them. When they died far from home. No family stood at their bedsides. No priest spoke the last rites in their language. They died as strangers in the only world they could remember. Their graves are unmarked and unknown. They are scattered across a continent they never chose. They are the part of the story no one tells. The ones who survived long enough to lose everything twice. Stephen of Cloyes was 12 years old. He was not evil. He simply believed something that was not true with a certainty that moved thousands of people. His wrongness destroyed thousands of lives. The kings of Europe did nothing. The church did nothing. The adults who should have protected those children watched them march and turned away. No one stopped them. No one was ever punished. The slave traders Hugh Farius and William Porcus kept their profits. They went home to their families. History does not record what became of them. They faced no consequence of any kind. The mothers and fathers never stopped waiting. They lit candles for decades. They died without answers. Their grief was never resolved. It was simply outlasted by time and then forgotten. Today the Children's Crusade is taught in schools as a cautionary tale. About fanaticism. About the exploitation of the innocent. About what happens when belief is weaponized against those who cannot defend themselves. The lesson is not complicated. Belief without knowledge is dangerous. Faith without wisdom is deadly. Children are not soldiers. They should never be sent to war by the certainty of someone else. The sea did not part. Jerusalem did not fall. The children did not return. They marched into the waves believing they were walking to heaven. They walked to something else entirely. A wooden cross washed up on a beach. A child who believed. A child who marched. A child who never came home. No name. No grave. But the story will not die.